and there are no links there.
Oh, no, I do not know why that's the case. That's okay. I will email you those documents.
Great, thanks.
Yep. And this is recording now. So. All right, can everyone see this agenda? Okay, so we'll start with Laura's presentation on EDA funding criteria. And then we shall talk about the types of projects that typically qualify for EDA funding, best practices for crafting application, applying for EDA funding, among other things. She'll also talk about some examples of projects that received EDA funding. At that point, I think we'll open up to any questions that Mandy or Darren or Pete have, and then we can conclude with talking about two of these transportation projects the city of Richland is currently working on that perhaps we can see ways to help those projects qualify for EDA funding at some point in the future. So that's the agenda. And so how about we do some quick introductions. Laura, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I see some familiar faces and maybe a couple of new faces. I'm Laura Ives with the Economic Development Administration. I'm the Washington State representative. I've been with EDA for about 2 years. I say this, I think, every time, but I really love the opportunity to get to work with communities across Washington and take projects that are so meaningful to the communities and help mold them to the EDA mold and get them ready for EDA funding. So really excited about this opportunity to meet with all of you today.
Great. Mandy, go ahead.
Mandy Wellner with City of Richland, and I'm the Economic Development Manager.
And Darren, please.
Darren Airasmith, I'm with the city's Economic Development Department. I'm planning and asset management.
And Pete, please.
Good morning, I'm Pete Rogalski. I'm the Public Works Director here.
Thanks. And then just in case anybody else watches this later on, Michelle, will you introduce yourself?
Michelle Holt, I'm the Executive Director at Benton-Franklin Council of Governments.
And Darren, or Devin, please.
Devin Diaz, Community and Economic Development Manager for Benton-Franklin Council of Governments.
And Aaron, please.
Good morning, everybody. I am the Regional Planning Manager with the Benton-Franklin Council of Governments.
Okay, and then I'm John Kennedy. I'm the Economic Recovery Coordinator at Benton-Franklin Council of Governments. Okay, great. Well, Laura, the floor is yours.
All right, fantastic. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, are you guys able to see that? All right, great. And I'm in presentation mode. Are you able to see just the slides? I have notes as well, but want to make sure that you're just seeing the slides.
I think I'm just seeing the slides.
Okay, fantastic. All right, we'll go ahead and dive in then. This morning, I'm going to do just a quick overview of what we do at EDA and highlight some current funding opportunities. And then, as John mentioned, I'll talk about a few kind of recent examples. I think sometimes it's helpful for folks to see some projects that we've funded to get an idea of the type of work we do and what might look familiar and possible for their regions, their communities. So just a little bit about EDA. We're a small, pretty nimble agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce that provides a significant impact by helping to make it easier for businesses to start and grow in the United States. And we do this by working with local economic development partners like the COG to advance their economic development projects by providing grants for projects that are tied to the region's long-term sustainable economic development strategy. So EDA provides grants to non-federal governments, such as yourselves, also including tribes as well as nonprofits in areas suffering from economic distress. Now, our focus is solely economic development, so we fund projects that help with job creation and job retention, and we're really looking at those higher skill, higher wage, permanent private sector jobs, and are also looking for projects that generate private sector investment. We have different programs available. I'm going to touch on just two of them today. We have our Public Works program for construction grants, and we have our Economic Adjustment Assistance, or EAA program, which can fund a wide variety of construction and non-construction projects. Under EAA, EDA has received disaster relief funding in recent years. So in 2018 and 2019, we received disaster supplemental funding. In 2020, we received disaster funding through CARES. And in 2021, we received disaster funding through the American Rescue Plan. And you can also see that EDA funds technical assistance, our Build to Scale program, and revolving loan funds, all under EAA. So there's a lot of programs that we fund under that umbrella program. You know, as I mentioned, EDA awards grants to non-federal government entities, including tribes, as well as nonprofits that are acting in cooperation with a general purpose political subdivision of a state, which is usually a county, city, or town. EDA grants usually require a match. Tribes are eligible for a 100% grant rate, but other entities are eligible if their area meets the economic distress requirements. And that rate depends on the severity of distress. But our standard grant rate is 50%. So if you have a $200,000 project, that would be eligible for $100,000 in EDA funding. Right now, because of the pandemic, the entire US is eligible for an 80% grant rate. So that $200,000 project would be eligible for $160,000 in EDA funds. Applications for EDA funding need to align with one or more of our investment priorities, and they're listed here. You can see that equity is at the forefront of those initiatives. We are looking at projects that are going to benefit historically underserved communities. Next, we have the recovery and resilience, and it's important to know that all projects that want to be considered for 80% funding as a result of the pandemic must meet this investment priority and demonstrate how their project will help the community recover from the impacts of the pandemic and be more resilient in the wake of future economic shock. So projects must meet one or more of these investment priorities. It's not required that you meet all of them. In fact, we prefer that you make a strong case for one, maybe two, and not try to meet all of them. All right, we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the Public Works construction program. Generally, EDA construction grants run from about $1 million to $3 million. So this is a list of some of the most common types of projects that we see. You can see we fund broadband systems. The city of Anacortes was just recently funded a broadband project. We've got workforce training facilities. And I've got a couple examples there if we want to talk about them. Industrial parks, I think, are kind of our bread and butter. Business incubators and accelerators, we're seeing a huge uptick in those types of projects right now. A lot of small businesses support for businesses struggling as a result of the pandemic. Wastewater systems, high-tech shipping and logistics centers, science and research parks, and tech-based facilities. For construction projects, all right. For construction projects, we do expect to see significant job creation and or job retention. And this may vary a little bit depending on how rural or urban an area is. We do understand that a rural region is not perhaps going to be able to provide the same number of jobs for a project that you might expect to see in an urban area. So we do take that into consideration. But most types of projects, you know, we're looking for good permanent jobs, and most of the projects are also going to generate private sector investment. So it's important to show evidence that the project, it's important to show evidence that the projected economic impacts will in fact occur, especially given, the current conditions where a lot of the economy is struggling. So you can see that list several ways that we document job creation or private sector investment is through beneficiaries. And those are the for-profit, corporations or businesses that are going to benefit from the EDA investment and can speak to that. So, they say if EDA invests in this project, we anticipate being able to create so many new jobs, and we will, as a result, invest, so much money into the area. We also love to see letters of support from businesses. You can use other forms to justify the needs, such as a market-based economic analysis or looking at past performance, if there's similar projects. That's a really key part of the application. For non-construction projects, we generally see them run from about about 50,000 to 300,000. Sometimes they're going to be more, especially if they're a revolving loan fund or an equipment purchase project. You can see some examples here are studies or plans for broadband systems, manufacturing or other cluster strategies, entrepreneurial training. We have funded some tours and studies and strategies, industrial site master plans, and feasibility or other studies for incubators or maker spaces. All right, there are a few things that we're going to see that successful grant applications have in common. So a quick overview. First and foremost, we want to see that you're an eligible applicant and that your region meets the economic distress criteria. Next, we really want to see that your matching funds are secured. So whether you're coming in for a 50% grant rate, or 50% grant rate or 80% grant rate, we need to see that your match shares are committed, available, and unencumbered. We want to see that your project aligns with the region's comprehensive economic development strategy, that it meets one or more of those investment priorities that I mentioned a few slides back. And again, demonstration that it's going to help the area's economy. So for a construction project, we want to see evidence that it will result in higher paying, higher skilled jobs. And for non-construction projects, generally it's more setting the stage to bolster the economy and to create those jobs. And then we like to see the collaboration with key partners that are going to make the project a success. I don't know if we want to pause there, or if I want to go ahead and jump into just a few example projects. Does anyone have any questions before I dive into? Okay.
Yeah. Any questions? Okay, I guess you're good, Laura.
Okay, great. So I want to share the example of the Port of Woodland. This is a total project cost of $7 million. It's a little bit higher than I mentioned we typically see in our public works program. So we awarded them about $3.6 million and they provided a $3.6 million match. So that's our standard 50% grant rate. This was prior to the pandemic. The scope of work was to support the full infrastructure build out of their industrial park, including construction of the roadway and completion of a 23,000 square foot building. So the benefit was that it was going to allow the port to create much needed space for businesses in light manufacturing industries and also create additional employment and economic opportunities. So helping to attract businesses to the area. And they estimated 126 jobs created and about $6.5 million leveraged of private investment. The next project I wanted to highlight was the Spokane Tribe of Indians. This was a total project cost of $1.8 million. As I mentioned, tribes are not necessarily expected to provide local share or local match. So the scope of work was, again, infrastructure within a particularly distressed part of the county. So the project is going to make critical roadway improvements that need to support business development in a designated opportunity zone. Once completed, the project will promote community resiliency. It'll help to create jobs and strengthen economic growth throughout the region. So they estimate 200 jobs created and about $12.8 million leveraged in private investment.
Can I ask one quick question on your previous example for the Woodland Park? So where you had talked about it was a build out of the roads and a building, did they already have an occupant for the building, or was that something that they were hoping to attract because they had a building? Because I know we get inquiries all the time. We just don't have any buildings already. And so I was curious how that worked.
That's a great question, and we run into that challenge a lot. It's hard to have committed tenants if you don't have maybe the utilities in place. You know, it's too early to see those tenants. We do, so in this particular scenario, there were two projects that were actually pretty similar at the same time. Both were looking to build out part of their industrial park. One had a couple of committed tenants. The other, I believe, what EDA had done was they had provided them funds to conduct a vacancy rate, like land, vacancy rate study. And from that, they determined that there was no vacancy available for businesses to come in. And so in that case, that's how they were able to demonstrate the demand for the project. I apologize, I don't remember if that was this one or the one that was real similar.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Laura, would you mind providing an explanation, brief explanation for what you mean for distressed communities, perhaps? How's that term being defined?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we can, yes, that's a great question. So when we are looking at distress, there are a few different ways to meet the distress criteria. Generally speaking, we are looking at 24-month average unemployment rates and per capita income. We can look at other factors, such as underemployment. We can look at special needs, which is how the pandemic factors in. And then I was going to say, looking at the 24-month average unemployment rates or per capita income, you can look at those at a county-wide level, or you can actually, look at a more granular level at census tracts to determine eligibility there. Devin, did that answer your question? Or did you?
Yes, you did. I was going to ask, how are you going to define the region, like city of Richland versus the bi-county region, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like you addressed that question for me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to do kind of a demonstration. I can walk you through our Stats America Distress tool. This is an EDA funded tool that allows you to look at some of that data. So if that'd be helpful, I can walk folks through that.
Please, yeah, we have plenty of time.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead and just do my last example really quickly, and then I can share my screen and go over that. The last project I want to talk about is the Skamania County PUD. This was quite a large project, above $9 million. This was, I mentioned earlier, we received disaster supplemental funding in 2018, and this fell under that funding opportunity. So EDA was able to make an award of $7.4 million. We do typically or often see larger projects funded under the disaster supplemental funding opportunities. It was matched by roughly $1.8 million in local share for an 80% grant rate. And in their case, this was to fund upgrades for an electrical substation that supports commercial and industrial customers in the county. So there was, the area sustained major damages from a storm. That storm received a presidentially declared disaster, which is why they qualified for this funding opportunity. But the project is intended to increase the reliability and access to electrical power. So in this situation, once completed, the project will sustain the region's economic growth. support job creation and promote resiliency after future natural disasters. But really the focus for them was retaining 175 jobs supported by this upgrade. So again, under our disaster programs, we might see something just a little bit different. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Any questions on those 3 projects before I jump into the demonstration with Stats America? Okay, give me just a moment. Oops, did I cancel screen share or no?
Not yet. You still have screen share.
Oh, stop presenting. There we go. Okay. All right. Give me just a moment and I will pull up. All right, is everyone able to see that?
Yes, we can.
All right, maybe I'll just pop this in the chat really quickly. Follow along if you'd like. Okay, so this is Stats America. Again, this is an EDA funded page, and this is our distress tool. So what we can do, oh, I'm really put on the spot here. Okay, sorry folks, is Richland and Benton or Franklin?
It's Benton County.
Okay. Okay, so this is looking at distress at a county-wide level. All right, so I'm going to click on Benton. Then you scroll down and it's provided this information. So you can see the 24-month average unemployment rate compared to the US. So it's actually a little bit better. And you can see the per capita income. So not a lot of distress at the county level compared to the US. If we scroll back up again, this is looking at the county level. If we look at the track tool, we've got a couple of options. We can look at the map again and zoom in and find the correct census tracts. Or we can go down to the drop-down selection if you know where they are. So you've got Washington, we'll go to Benton. We'll just add a couple of tracks for the purposes of this project or this demonstration. Click on Get Data. And same thing, you're going to see the average unemployment rate and the per capita income.
And Laura, this is Devin again. With this tool, on the county tool, can you do 2 counties? So do Benton and Franklin, given our proximity to Franklin and Pasco? And because one of the reasons why I asked is because of the industry in the city of Richland, whether it's the lab or research district or Hanford and Columbia Generating Station and Energy Northwest, it's really a major hub for all employment for both Benton and Franklin County. So being able to look at both, I think, will give us a more accurate picture of the region versus just looking at Benton County.
Yeah, absolutely, you can. So if you're submitting an EDA application, you have an opportunity to talk about the region that's going to be impacted by the project. And so if it's really primarily only going to benefit Benton, you know, you'd want to be straightforward about that. But obviously, like you said, given their proximity, given their connection, if it's understood that the benefits are going to be reached by both, yeah, you can absolutely include both of that information. Now, when we talk about specific project location, you know, when your project is submitted in a project officer, we do the due diligence on our end and verify information. So we will see, you know, where the project itself is located, and perhaps it's not in an overly distressed census tract or county. But then you know, you have the opportunity to help us understand why the benefits are going to be shared across the more distressed areas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think this is a new tool looking at the demographic report. Yeah, any questions on the Stats America tool?
So Laura, you suggest using this before any entity uses or seeks to apply for EDA funding, they should be using this tool as a preparation step in crafting the application?
Well, I think it's important information to have, and it's not the only way to meet the distress criteria. That's a good question, and you know, when we look at the competitiveness of an application, we're going to look at several factors. Given the type of program that you're looking for, every program is going to have their own notice of funding opportunity. And within that notice of funding opportunity, there is going to be a section called the investment review criteria. And you're going to have a list of things that EDA is going to more or less look for in your application. We are looking at the overall distress of the region. We're looking at the ability for the project to generate jobs and private sector investment. So, and you know, given the current climate, given the impacts of COVID, there are different ways to meet that distress criteria, but EDA will always look at the 24-month average unemployment and the per capita income just to get a general sense.
Okay.
For some reason I'm not able to. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay. Yep. You're done. Screen sharing. Are there any further questions about the presentation before we perhaps talk? We have about half an hour to play with here to talk about those two transportation infrastructure projects. Are there any questions before we move on to those?
No, and I just to preface how we came up with those, Pete, just so you know, I just identified a couple of things that we already have on the horizon that we know are active projects, just as some examples of some things that we have, knowing that we had put in an application last year, I believe, for a sewer extension to our 1,341 acre area that kind of as a new addition to our industrial park, and that application was not successful, unfortunately. And so I think we had a quick Zoom meeting regarding that specific application previously, so I didn't want to bring that back. But I thought that perhaps if we turned that upside down and looked at something else completely that we're doing, even if they may not be good fits, I thought it would be a good approach to at least see what or what not was right about them to help us gauge maybe future projects and go forward. Because I believe these two projects are completely funded, Pete, or they're designed and they're looking for funding.
Yeah, not quite. But so I guess I appreciate that. I'm wondering, there was the sort of the planning grant category that you explained, Laura, or planning / feasibility. I'm wondering if the group has considered something. The thing that comes to mind is the MCI initiative in North Richland, and or PNNL's new energy research facilities, and sort of leveraging those to plan for business development that would. And I know I'm kind of starting to tread into your guys' world more than I do enough to be competent at it, but for instance, the two road the road projects that are on the agenda are road improvements of regional significance, but I think it would be difficult. Well, I should say, we would expect them to support job growth in general by making our transportation network more efficient and effective. But it seems to me trying to document a real tight nexus or linkage between them and job creation sites or particular job creating businesses would be difficult. I'd be happy to explain what it is we're doing, but I wonder, maybe you've already kind of done the dialogue about some of those sort of incubator job creation zones in our community, and how to introduce EDA into that, to be a potential partner in those.
We haven't done our end just yet because I wasn't quite sure we were prepared for kind of the more specifics of those projects, but I think as those are coming together, I know there's a presentation with Kate Gordon today regarding some of that, and so if we can kind of move towards some of those projects in the future, I kind of thought this conversation could help give us some of those boundaries so that I know I bring the right project the next time, or at least something closer that can achieve the things that you're looking for. And I think to Pete's point, while the projects that are on the agenda are not necessarily job creators, I wondered to what degree, because they greatly affect the flow of traffic to get our larger employers to and from their sites. Those are two big linchpins in our community for how that traffic moves. And so as we're adding more jobs and creating those out there with the growth coming, those are going to be two things that get inundated with additional traffic. There really wouldn't be another way to go. And so I didn't know how loosely or directly creating jobs needed to apply, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we did really quickly. I want to go back to your point about your previous project that wasn't successful. I think we did have a conversation about it, and I think it was the lack of committed beneficiaries. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then I think at that point we had talked about, if we had some letters of, we didn't locate because, then that maybe would be helpful. But I didn't at that time know that there was an opportunity to utilize the funding for perhaps the vacancy rate study, which I think would be of assistance in that kind of situation as well, to show that there really isn't another product that we could locate 100-acre site. And so knowing that there would be a need, and we have some examples.
Yeah, well, yeah, great. I will say, EDA has kind of been put on people's radar in a way that it wasn't before, with the 1.5 billion through CARES and the 3 billion through the American Rescue Plan. And so right now things are very competitive, and I think a construction project that does not have beneficiaries just because you're competing against the projects that do. But I think the vacancy rate can really help support that and help make a strong case for you. In regards to the two construction projects, I think you've both certainly highlighted the potential challenges. How indirect or direct does it need to be? For those types of projects, kind of same thing. There's some good boots on the ground work, that may be able to support it. Did you say that there were new firms coming in that have been identified, but they're concerned about the traffic or just potential future growth? Yes,
so I can say we get RFIs all the time that look at our industrial area, which is served primarily probably through this Aaron Drive flyover portion more than the other, but they're both main conduits. And so those being large employers that are looking, at rail access and those types of things, look at commute time to a major highway. And so that's where anything we can do to shorten the amount of time it takes for a truck to get to the highway, which is going to have to do with connectivity and flow and lights and all the things that we can work on to help that timing, I think is enticing, right? Like a good example would be, you know, Dairy Gold, we were second or third on their list for a location in our industrial park, but we were 3 minutes farther away from a highway than the site they chose across the river. And I mean, there were some other things that I think were of issue there as well, but on our end, that was the reason from them that it didn't work, and then we would have had to work through, you know, wastewater and other issues. But so kind of trying to look at strategically how we can improve those. I can't geographically move it closer to the freeway, unfortunately, but I can make it faster to get there. And so that was kind of some things we were looking at, just try to be a little more competitive in the region. And then knowing that we are being positioned as kind of a hub for clean energy, we've been, you know, adding solar projects. We're looking at major battery storage projects. We're looking at a test site for new nuclear, building a modular reactor here. So there's a lot of those things on the horizon that are investments that are happening in the next, you know, 2 to 5 years. And so seeing how we can make sure that we're poised to accommodate that workforce and that construction even influx prior to implement, I think is something that we don't want to be behind on, because those things are moving whether we're a part of it or not. And so trying to make sure we're ready to accommodate those commuters.
Yeah, that's a great point. I realize the challenge of having to have those beneficiaries identified ahead of time when you really just want to put yourself in an advantageous position and ready to receive them. And I think that's where the vacancy rates or other studies, economic impact analysis can come in, and perhaps where there aren't committed beneficiaries, if there are letters of support, you know, in was it Port of Woodland or the Camas Washougal? Those were the two projects that were fairly similar. I think one had a vacancy rate and one had committed beneficiaries. You know, EDA had originally funded the vacancy rate that they then used to use for the implementation of that project. Obviously, you know, CURB is a great resource as well to fund those types of studies. If you wanted to do like an economic impact analysis of the projects, that may be a route. So I guess I do acknowledge the challenge, and I think we'll have to think creatively about it, because the reality is you'll still be coming up against the projects that do have those committed beneficiaries, and EDA likes to see that as assurance that the project will result directly in job creation. So yeah, that is.
And I guess to that point, then I would be interested to kind of talk about timeline, because I know, you know, once we get a committed project, oftentimes we don't have, obviously we lose the benefit of time, right? Like right now I have time to chase money and figure out how to line it up and get everybody to play nice and get it all so that we have time to construct and we have time to find money and we have. But once we get a committed partner, a lot of times that timeline is accelerated tremendously. And so then, you know, chasing some of these funds, how does that kind of play together?
Yeah, because the beneficiary may not want to wait around for 2 years while you get the grant and construct the building. Or yeah. That's a really fair point. And we've heard other folks raise that issue. You know, I think maybe the best advice I can give is, you know, if you've got a project that you think we can start working on now and start developing now, get it all ready, get it all slated, you know, kind of set yourself up that by the time the next funding opportunity comes along, or you want to submit under our public works program, if you've got all the other economic impact analysis or the vacancy rates or whatever, you know, you need to support, perhaps at that time, then you're able to go out and look at the beneficiaries and say, hey, we're queued up, you know, we think we've got a strong case here, and help kind of close that gap a little bit. It's a difficult one, I know.
No, just checking, and I hate to put you on the spot and ask the tough questions. So just things that we struggle with internally, and thought I'd take the opportunity to ask. So I appreciate you entertaining.
It's a fair question.
One other thing, I know a lot of times we get studies done, and then, you know, like to your point, we may not be quite ready to utilize it for an application. How long are those numbers considered valid in the EDA world, if we were to get a study done and then not use it for 2 years, is that we need to do a new study? You know, how closely do I need to time that? Because I mean, I could apply to do that tomorrow.
Right.
But I want to make sure that it stays relevant.
Yeah, I don't think we have a hard and fast rule about that. I think something within a couple of years, I think is still very relevant. I think if we're getting beyond 5 is maybe where we start to see if there's anything more relevant or recent.
Okay. And often an update is faster than, you know, getting a full-blown study anyway, so.
Hey, Laura, I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about economic impact analysis besides job creation, retention, and private sector investment. What other criteria fall under that?
That's a really great question. You know, the way that the EDA is currently authorized, our statutes and our regulations, that really is how we are measuring economic development. You know, the great thing I think about the SEDS and about your SEDS is that I think we give the regions a little bit more flexibility to define economic growth and economic resiliency in the way that is fitting for your region. But we are fairly limited right now with how we can define that. So, you know, housing is a great example. Childcare is a great example of how those contribute really significantly to the economy, but they're not things that EDA can participate in. And likewise, you know, we see a lot of folks come in talking about how much is going to come back into the city or to the region. Dollars, but really we are looking at job creation, private sector investment. So, yeah, applications are a little bit limited in that way. Not that there can't be other benefits, obviously, but that's how we'll measure economic development.
Is there also a rubric to measure regional impact? Is there a way to sort of easy to understand criteria for defining and explaining regional impact in an application?
I think regional impact maybe is an opportunity to talk about additional benefits beyond job creation and private sector investment. You know, what are the other positive impacts if you're opening up industrial, an industrial park, even if you only have 2 committed tenants, it's going to spur so much kind of future growth, or it's going to kind of set the stage, or, you know, cluster development strategies, same thing, right? What's going to be the extended impact in the region?
And we've asked these questions in the past, but just to reiterate, there's if a project is mixed use development that has that's not a black mark or anything like that, right? For
when you say mixed use development, as in like there might be residential or so, as it's outlined in our notice of funding opportunity, EDA cannot participate in projects that are primarily residential in nature. There can be ancillary, you know, benefits from the projects that reach residences. I'd say one of the larger challenges with mixed use developments is a lot of times we see kind of retail and residential. And so just keeping in mind that we're looking at higher skill, higher wage job creation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we get that a lot. And I haven't seen, not that it can't be done, but I haven't seen a lot of projects be successful with mixed use.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
Not for me.
Okay. Oh, great. Well, then I think that concludes our agenda for the meeting, and we will provide the recording for this meeting once it becomes available. And I sent out a little while ago the slide deck to everyone, so we should all have that. And Laura, thank you so much for meeting with us and with all this really useful information.
Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I actually do have one more question for Mandy. I see you have Amanda
Please.
on your.
Yeah.
Mandy.
Yeah.
So I want to just follow up on that on the EDA project that wasn't successful initially. What's the status of that? Have you been able to move it forward, or is that project still pending? Have you received? Yeah,
We haven't received any additional funding. As far as I know, I don't believe we applied for any additional funding. We kind of took back some of the comments that we had discussed in our last meeting, and we're kind of retooling to look at what that looks like. We had our match and everything secured for that. I think part of the struggle is we had landed on if it were a more full road project as opposed to just a sewer project, there may have been more opportunity to outline potential, but then of course that triples the cost of the project, which then creates further complication. And so being able to look at what our budget enables in order to open that up. So it's still a priority and something that we are looking at for next steps, but it hasn't been something that we've been able to really get off the ground just yet.
okay. Well, if you want to keep, the dialogue open about that particular project and see how we can, kind of improve it, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think at some point we definitely will do that, and I'll kind of get with Darren and Pete to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that's so smart, because then, for the next ARPA or the next CARES, you've got a project lined up, ready to go, and so that's great.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where Darren's and my strategy right now has kind of headed towards, is identifying some of those maybe more long-range projects that we can at least get some of the basic infrastructure costing done. Whether, a good example is we want to do a rail extension, so we're working on getting, some of those environmental things out of the way and some of those reports done, so that as soon as we do have a funding opportunity available, we have a project on the shelf ready to push.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it helps to know what types of projects do work for EDA, so that as we work through our strategic plan and kind of our project list, it stays top of mind for what we could send your way.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't rule it out just because you weren't successful in the first round. So it sounds like you've still got a great project that we could probably work with.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a great day and weekend.
Thanks,
Right.
you too.
You too.
Thank you, Laura.
Take care.